And our headlines on this Thursday afternoon, July 13th, here in South Korea. The country's central bank decides to maintain its key interest rate at 3.5% for the fourth session in a row amid prolonged economic uncertainties beyond borders. Meanwhile, in Lithuania, President Yoon urges a greater united front with NATO against Pyongyang's provocations and calls on his Japanese counterpart for joint efforts to ease public concerns here over Fukushima wastewater plants. And North Korea earlier on this Thursday confirms its test firing of a Hwasong-18 solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile towards the East Sea back on Wednesday under the guidance of its leader, Kim Jong-un. President Yoon Suk-yeol is in Poland and poised to meet with his Polish counterpart Andrzej Duda on Thursday to address a diverse spectrum of bilateral interests. Upon arrival on Wednesday, President Yoon sat down with Korean expats in Warsaw and highlighted the strategic partnership shared by the two countries given their expanding trade ties. Traveling with a delegation of 89 corporate leaders, President Yoon is expected to seek greater collaboration in high-tech technologies as well as in the construction sector in line with plans to rebuild Ukraine. Prior to his departure for Poland, President Yoon Suk-yeol met with his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida on the margins of the NATO summit in Lithuania and addressed public concerns here over the Fukushima radioactive wastewater discharge plan. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
Sitting down with his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida on the sidelines of the NATO summit on Wednesday, President Yoon Suk-yeol made three requests to further ensure the safety of South Koreans ahead of the planned release of Fukushima nuclear power plant wastewater. The first, that Japan share the release's monitoring results in real time with South Korea. The second, that South Korean experts be part of the monitoring team. And finally, that Japan halts the release process if the concentration of radioactive materials surpasses standards. Yoon also said he respects the IAEA's recent report that the release plan meets international standards, but re-emphasized that the health and safety of South Koreans are the utmost priority. According to the top office, Kishida said there won't be any release that threatens the health of people in South Korea or Japan and promised transparency and real-time communications. However, the Japanese government didn't make a clear announcement on whether South Korea's request to be part of the monitoring team will be accepted. Despite the sensitive issue, the two leaders embraced their newly improved relationship. The two last met just a month and a half ago, and both said the resumption of more direct diplomacy is bearing fruit.
함께 노력한 결과 한일 양국 관계는 개선과 발전의 방향으로 지금 움직이고 있습니다. 저는 한일 양국이 협력하여 영내 평화와 번영, 글로벌 현안 해결에 크게 기여할 수 있다고 믿습니다.
As President Yoon and I have opened a new era for the two countries, there has been progress in various different types of cooperation in both government and private sectors.
According to the top office, the leaders also spoke about economic exchanges, which have resumed since the normalization of the relationship, with Japan relisting South Korea on its white list for trade. The two promised more official channels to further foster bilateral trade. In the meantime, they also used the opportunity to condemn North Korea's missile provocation from earlier in the day and promised to cooperate further on that issue. They also mentioned the three-way cooperation with the U.S. and pledged to continue working closely for security in the region. In fact, such a meeting is in the pipeline in the next month or two, with a Seoul, Washington, Tokyo trilateral summit already agreed. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, along with his summit with the Japanese Prime Minister, President Yoon sat down for a total of 13 one-on-ones with his counterparts in Europe and those from the Asia-Pacific, seeking to strengthen trade security amid geopolitical uncertainty. Our Lee Soo-jin has details.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol continues to pursue sales diplomacy. He attended 13 bilateral meetings during the NATO summit in Lithuania in an effort to strengthen the supply chain for key high-tech industries such as semiconductors and to expand into new markets.
This NATO summit had the largest number of bilateral talks with 13. Notably, 8 of them were the first bilateral meeting since the inauguration of President Yoon, and it is expected to be a starting point for creating new achievements in the future.
Yoon's meeting with Lithuania's President Nausėda on Wednesday was significant in terms of securing supply chains in the advanced tech industry, especially as the nation is a global leader in laser tech that's essential for ultra-precision and ultra-micro-processing of semiconductors. During the summit, both Yoon and Nausėda said they hope to expand cooperation between companies of both respective countries in the advanced tech sector. The Lithuanian president also expressed interest in South Korea's advanced weapons systems such as self-propelled artillery. President Yoon also met with the Prime Minister of the Netherlands on Tuesday to strongly encourage Dutch semiconductor equipment company ASML to invest in Korea. ASML is the maker of the world's top DUV lithography systems and is known to be currently considering building a DUV manufacturing plant in Asia. Yoon promised incentives such as financial support and tax deductions. As for expanding into new markets, South Korea is mainly trying to boost exports of nuclear power plants, arms, and infrastructure.
President Yoon explained the advantages of Korean-made nuclear power plants to the heads of the Netherlands, Hungary, Romania, and Sweden, all nations that have plans to build new nuclear power plants, and also offered cooperation on the nuclear front.
The top office also said that it would put in its best efforts to work with relevant ministries and companies to systematically follow up with the agenda items discussed during the summit to produce meaningful results. 이수진, Arirang News.
Beyond his bilateral engagements in Lithuania, President Yoon addressed broader challenges to global peace and stability by shedding grave light on North Korea's alarming provocations and by pledging greater support for the cause in Ukraine. Our senior presidential correspondent Oh Soo-young reports from Vilnius.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has called for stronger condemnation and response to North Korea's nuclear and missile provocations as he addressed world leaders at a meeting of NATO countries in Lithuania extended to invited nations. Noting that North Korea's missiles reach could extend beyond its neighboring countries to cities like London, Paris and Berlin, Yoon on Wednesday warned that Pyongyang's actions threaten global peace and security. On that note, the South Korean leader expressed appreciation for NATO's condemnation of Pyongyang's nuclear weapons program in a joint communiqué released the previous day, which also calls for North Korea's complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization. NATO's statement in 2022 did not include North Korea, and the alliance has not issued a joint condemnation of the regime's nuclear and missile program since 2018. During his speech, Yoon also renewed Seoul's support for Ukraine, currently provided in the form of humanitarian aid and non-lethal weapons. The president emphatically promised that he and South Koreans will stand with Ukrainians until the day when their freedom is fully restored, and pledged to contribute to the NATO-Ukraine Trust Funds towards building Kyiv's resilience. Furthermore, reflecting on Seoul's new bilateral partnership program with NATO adopted Tuesday, covering 11 areas of cooperation, Yoon highlighted cyber cooperation and expanding military intel sharing as vital areas going forward, with South Korea to establish an international cyber training center. A senior presidential official told reporters, Seoul is also expected to work closely with NATO on the organization's system that collects and utilizes military intelligence among member countries. Increasing its participation in information exchanges could provide insights for Seoul on sharing nuclear-related intelligence with the United States, as the two allies create and operate a nuclear consultation group to counter North Korea's growing belligerence. On that note, President Yoon stressed that the growing use of digital media and cyberspace are being leveraged by authoritarian forces, whose unhesitant use of war, violence and manipulation of public opinion challenge international norms. He called for nations with common universal values to cooperate more firmly in solidarity, saying Indo-Pacific and Atlantic security issues cannot be separated. On that note, Yoon on Wednesday moderated the second meeting of NATO's 4 Asia-Pacific partners, Japan, Australia and New Zealand.
Yoon's office says the AP4 leaders agreed to work more closely with NATO and Pacific Island countries, as well as bolster cooperation on supply chain diversity and resilience and cybersecurity. 오수영, Arirang News, Vilnius.
Here on the peninsula, North Korea on this Thursday morning confirmed its launch of a Hwasong-18 solid-fuel ICBM earlier on Wednesday. The test launch was reportedly overseen by its leader Kim Jong-un. My colleague Choi Min-jung has this latest.
North Korea confirmed that it test-fired its Hwasong-18 solid-fuel ICBM on Wednesday, under the watchful eye of leader Kim Jong-un. This marks the regime's second launch of the Hwasong-18 after its first test launch in April. The North state-run news agency, the KCNA, on Thursday reported that the intercontinental ballistic missile flew around 1,000 kilometers for more than 74 minutes at an altitude of over 6,600 kilometers before landing in the East Sea. Analysts say that when fired at a lower angle, the ICBM can fly more than 15,000 kilometers, meaning it could potentially hit the United States. The Hwasong-18 is also known to be harder to detect and intercept than liquid-fuel ICBMs. And according to North Korean media, Kim has vowed to take a series of stronger military offensive actions until the U.S. and South Korea admit and give up their hostile policy against the regime. Pyongyang also noted that the launch came at a grave period when the security situation on the Korean peninsula has reached a phase of nuclear crisis beyond the Cold War era. The launch comes a day after North Korea threatened to take military action against the U.S. for allegedly intruding on its airspace. Professor Yang Mu-jin at the University of North Korean Studies in Seoul interpreted the launch as a message of warning against the deployment of a U.S. nuclear ballistic submarine in South Korea. This comes as North Korea on Thursday also accused the U.S. of plotting to use nuclear weapons against the regime under the Washington Declaration, which includes enhanced deployment of U.S. strategic assets in South Korea. Experts also say the launch was the regime's attempt to make up for the failed launch of its spy satellite and to display its advancing missile technology prior to a widely anticipated large-scale military parade later this month. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Seoul Central Bank has shared intentions to keep its benchmark interest rate unchanged at 3.5%, taking into account a host of economic variables. Our finance correspondent Lee Dae-yeon reports.
The Bank of Korea has frozen its key interest rate for the fourth consecutive time. The central bank announced a decision following Thursday's Monetary Policy Committee meeting. With the rate freeze, the figure stays at 3.5%.
Inflation is expected to remain above the target level, and we still need to monitor the monetary policies of major countries and the household debt situation too. The Board of Governors voted unanimously to maintain the current tightening stance.
The BOK began raising the base rate in August 2021 when it decided to normalize the rate, which had been significantly lower due to COVID-19. But the base rate has remained at 3.5% since February. Concerns over the economy were the major factor behind the BOK's decision. However, it's still uncertain whether South Korea's economy will see a rebound in the second half of this year as the country awaits recovery in exports and domestic consumption. The Finance Ministry earlier this month lowered this year's economic growth outlook from 1.6 to 1.4%. The Bank of Korea also lowered its forecast to 1.4% amid sluggish recovery for the IT sector and the underwhelming impact of China's post-COVID reopening. The reason concerns over record-high delinquency rates against loans with the Korea Federation of Community Credit Cooperatives is another factor behind the decision. The cooperative has been struggling with liquidity woes and bank runs due to the soaring loan defaults, which are causing anxiety in the financial market. The country is also seeing a slowing trend of consumer price rises, with the inflation rate last month dropping to the 2% range for the first time in almost 2 years. Meanwhile, following the BOK's decision to hold the rate, the interest rate difference between South Korea and the U.S. stays at 1.75 percentage points. But as widely expected in the market, if the U.S. Fed decides to take a so-called baby step, raising its rates by 25 basis points, the rate difference would widen to 2 percentage points, a record-high figure. This unprecedented rate gap means tough times ahead with heavy pressure on foreign capital outflow and a weakening won against the U.S. dollar. Lee Dae-yeon, Arirang News.
Korea's ICT industry noted a trade surplus of some $4.6 billion in June, despite an overall decline in exports. According to the Trade Ministry on Thursday, the total value of tech exports last month amounted to over $16 billion, down over 22% on year, amid sluggish demand and a base effect as Korea posted record ICT exports last June. By product, chip exports plunged nearly 28%, while displays fell over 11%. In the U.S., price pressures continued to ease, with inflation standing at 3% in June. And this reality is fueling widespread speculation over the Federal Reserve's future rate policy. Our Ising-jae explains.
As the U.S. Consumer Price Index slowed faster than expected in June, expectations are growing that the end is near for U.S. Federal Reserve interest rate hikes. According to U.S. Department of Labor on Wednesday, June CPI rose 3.0% from the same month last year, slightly below the market forecast of 3.1%. The latest figures show that the country's inflation had shrank by a third since the June 2022 CPI showed a 9.1% rise compared to the same month the previous year. The June core CPI, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, rose 4.8% from a year ago, but was again below the market consensus of 5%. While some believe that the faster-than-expected slowdown in the country's inflation means that the U.S. Central Bank will impose a final hike in July instead of the 2 more rate hikes this year that policymakers had previously hinted, others are more cautious. They say that because core CPI is still in the 4% range, which is twice the U.S. Fed's target of 2%, the central bank could go ahead with 2 more rate hikes this year. Still, investors seem to be optimistic over the latest CPI figures as U.S. stocks and treasuries rallied while the U.S. dollar tumbled. Wall Street's benchmark S&P 500 stock index on Wednesday closed 0.7% higher, marking its highest level since April 2022, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq rose 1.2% on the day. Traders expect the U.S. Fed to pause its rate hike after a 25 basis point rate hike in July, putting the country's key interest rate in the 5.25 to 5.5% range. Ising-jae, Arirang News.
Korea's southern resort island is currently hosting its 46th Jeju Forum, with corporate leaders and government authorities, as well as relevant scholars, taking part in talks to bolster the economy. Our business correspondent Shin Ha-young is there.
The nation and its companies are focusing on economic recovery as the country has entered the second half of the year. The largest annual summer business forum, known as the Jeju Forum and hosted by the Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry, kicked off on Wednesday on the southern resort island of Jeju. Industry insiders, academic experts, and government officials are all participating to address the rapidly changing domestic and global economic environment and share business strategies. At the opening ceremony, the chairman of the KCCI, Choi Tae-won, who is also the chairman of SK Group, emphasized the importance of entering new global markets amid ongoing geopolitical risks.
The Chinese market was South Korea's top market, but nowadays it is necessary to replace it with new emerging markets. Hosting the 2030 World Expo in Busan helps us to do so by allowing us to engage with countries from around the world and seek new markets.
As the first speaker, Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho assessed the country's economy under a global economic slowdown and at a time of uncertainties. In particular, he pointed to the sluggish chip industry, a surge in household debt, and a decline in productivity due to the shrinking population as factors. He also introduced the government's policy direction that will stimulate South Korea's economy.
There are still remaining uncertainties. As part of short-term responses, the government will focus on improving the country's economic vitality and stabilizing people's livelihoods. In the long term, it will improve the country's fundamental economic structure.
Throughout the forum, Bank of Korea Governor Lee Chang-yong will analyze the current global economic situation and offer advice to help aid South Korea's economic rebound. AI could play its part too, and participants at the forum can learn about the latest trends and how AI can be used in a positive way. 550 representatives of businesses from across the country have gathered here under the theme Insight and Healing from Jeju Island. And the 4-day event will run until Saturday. 신하영, Arirang News, Jeju.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Italy, at least one person has died amid soaring temperatures. The rising mercury is part of a heatwave named Cerberus after the mythological three-headed dog. High temperatures are expected to continue for 2 weeks, and a new heatwave called Charon is set to replace Cerberus on Friday. The heat waves are threatening to top Italy's previous high of 48.8 degrees Celsius, set in August 2021 in Sicily. Other countries, including Spain, France and Greece, could see temperatures surpass 40 degrees. Several tourists in Italy have collapsed from the heat, and people are being urged to stay hydrated and to avoid drinking caffeine or alcohol. Now, the European Union has passed a law aimed at restoring damaged ecosystems. The Nature Restoration Law was passed in the EU Parliament in Brussels on Wednesday, with 336 votes in favour and 300 against. It means that countries in the bloc will need to restore 20% of the EU's natural land and sea ecosystems by 2030. It comes as Europe has seen a decline in its natural habitats, 81% of which have been determined to be in poor condition. The law was fiercely opposed by right-wing parties who say that it would harm farmers and risk food security. The bill's text will now be negotiated before a final agreement is reached. In more good news for nature, Colombia says that deforestation across the country fell 29% in 2022 compared to the previous year, while deforestation of its part of the Amazon rainforest dropped by 26%. Announced by the Colombian government on Wednesday, it's the lowest level of deforestation since 2013. Just over 1,200 square kilometers of forest was cut down, roughly 220,000 football fields. It's down from the 2021 total deforestation figure of 1,700 square kilometers. The drop was credited to paying local communities to protect forests and to criminal investigations launched against anyone suspected of financing deforestation. And finally, the 75th Primetime Emmy Awards announced its list of nominations on Wednesday. The drama Succession led the pack with 27 nominations, including those for Best Drama, Lead Actress, and even 3 of its cast tipped for Lead Actor. Not far behind was the video game adaptation Last of Us at 24 nominations. It was followed by Season 2 of White Lotus with 23 nominations. The awards show is considered the TV equivalent to the Oscars and honors the best in American primetime television over the past year. The winners will be announced on September 19th. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
At 8 p.m. on FX.
Good afternoon. We need to brace for massive monsoon rainfall starting this afternoon. Central regions will receive 30 to 80 millimeters an hour of very heavy rain. Then certain parts of the country will get downpours tomorrow. The capital area could see up to 250 millimeters of showers into tomorrow. The rest of the country could see more than 200 millimeters of downpours. Those in the capital will be soaked by heavy rain around mid-afternoon and after midnight. A rain advisory could be expanded to the whole country, with a preliminary rain advisory being issued, except on Jeju Island, where heat wave warnings remain in place. Temperatures will not rise much today, with most parts seeing figures in the mid to upper 20s this afternoon. Now, this year's rainy season seemed to be wetter and heavier, and you might be wondering when this monsoon season will come to an end. Well, for now, we are forecasting that the monsoonal front will stay with us through next week. Stay alert and safe. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Right, and those are the headlines at this hour. Thank you for watching.